Okay, so this is the third of the peace lectures, and this is part one, one last fable, and I will show you the list now of the four topics I'm going to talk about. So I'll let that run here. And I should say that this used to be the final lecture in this course, but I've reorganized the course a little bit. So it's sort of things to think about as we move into the fourth and last section of the course, which is this discussion of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. So basically, it's looking ahead, and the idea with these three lectures on peace is to have you look at some of this material before you get tired out. I mean, it's already tiring enough doing what you're doing. So, okay. So, I have tried in this course so far, and I will go on trying, that to give you my best reading of these situations, of these circumstances. And I wanted you to see that for want of a better way of putting it, we can't have the truth, basically. But we can try, and we have to try. We are really never going to get it. But we can get close. And there's sort of one of those law of diminishing returns. There's a point at which you begin to reach in what in the quantitative world they would call saturation, where you keep seeing the same stuff over and over again. You're like, well, I may not be getting absolutely every grain of sand on the beach, but I get a pretty good picture of what the beach looks like. And then you have to work with that. At the heart of the war conundrum is something like Ursula Le Guin's famous fable, The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas. And this text is quintessential Le Guin, which again declares itself to be fabular, just the way Labaki's text did, right? Where do we go now? And it asks questions which are tougher and realer as we go into the story. Le Guin is famous for a vast number of her books, but for our purposes, if you're interested in Le Guin, and I think you may have done this story, particularly with Warren, if you took classes with Warren Steele, I think he often uses omelas. And it's good, I think, to come back to it. It's no harm. I would like to use The Word for World as Forest. It's this little short novel. It's almost a novella. It's like 140 pages, basically. And it's a fast read. But my experience is that people are just overburdened. They don't have the time to read a little novel. It's like, no, it's too much. So you might have a look at that. And if you, in this story, as you know, the most perfect place that Le Guin can imagine exists because one person suffers, basically. Just one, right? That's the deal. There's this wonderful world of Omelas, or in Omelas, but in this one cellar, there's this abused kid, and that's the deal. And for Omelas to be an amazing place, there has to be this kid. Okay, and the question she wraps us up in is, because it looks as though we'll be able to get away from having to answer this moral dilemma, is what would we do? And that's in many ways the purpose of a sort of moral conundrum like this. And in many ways these are really old techniques of you tell a story, and as people get invested in the story, then you say, now what'd you do? And you're like, wait a minute, I thought there was a story that you're going to give me the ending. It's like, no, the ending is up to you. And you're like, oh, here we go. And so that's fairly common. And so essentially it's problem literature, which presents you at the end of the text with a problem, which is unresolved in one way or another by the author. Because your job as the audience is to resolve it. Okay. And the question, this is the question, or as Tolstoy phrased it when he struggled with the problem of the terrible poverty that he saw in 19th century Russia, was famously, "What then must we do?" This is the name of his essay, except it was in Russian, which I alter to "How then must we live?" Because for me, how we live includes what we do, but it also includes what we think and who we are and more, basically. So that's fine. So the question that Le Guin forces us into is, would we stay or would we walk? Right? Which is a false dilemma, right? Because that's her deal, the way that her narrator anyway lays down and we don't know if the narrator is her or we don't know, right? But the way that she lays down the rules are that, if you're going to live in a place like Amelas, there has to be one suffering child, okay, treated like a criminal, badly treated. So it's not just that they're not just suffering somewhere, but they're in a beautiful room, or they're sitting out in a beautiful plaza, being treated well. It's like no, they're being treated horribly. They're being neglected. And so the question that she tries to force the reader into, is, would you stay or would you walk? Well, we know what that is. It's a false dilemma, right? Either this or that. And we already know the answer, right? We stay. If you walk, where are you planning on going? Because that is, the sort of supposition is that the people who leave Amelas are going to go and fight the better fight. They're going to go and they're going to create a place where it isn't necessary to essentially torture somebody so that everybody else can live well. And that's the parable that she's sort of forcing you into. And if you accept the terms of a parable, then you get stuck, because basically you're like, in this worldview, there's either this or that, and you're not allowed to answer any other way. And okay, and I think our initial, and then you feel bad. Basically, you're like, oh, geez, I feel terrible because I see that I'm in this position. Oh, that's awful. And so the intent there is to not force you, but is to urge you to do better. Go find a kid and solve the problem, whatever the kid may be, right? Because the kid is clearly a model for something else. The kid isn't really about a kid, although it might actually be about a child, but it's some other problem, whatever that problem might be for you. And it's going to be, for each person, it's going to be a different thing. It's like, well, the culture is fine except that it abuses women, or the culture is fine except that 80% of it doesn't get a good education, or whatever it is. And that's not exactly a child in some underground room somewhere, some cellar somewhere. That's massive, right? And that's part of the point. And we accept that this is the deal. We're lucky. Basically, we were born here, or we've come here. Everyone has said it, and it's absolutely true that we're lucky to live in peace. It's true. It is a peace which is broken in the United States by regular and massive gun slaughters. It's broken by systemic racism and sexism, by misogyny, violence against trans individuals, people of all kinds of different individualities, the LGBTQ plus, basically, the numbers of different people who are just different, right? They're different from and that these differences are not comfortable. They are not allowed to be at home. Okay, different languages, different belief systems, religions, different ways of eating, different ways of dressing, whatever it might be, differences. And for these differences, from propaganda, that's what propaganda works on, differences. It invests in differences, it inflates differences, it divides it makes differences clearer. It separates and pushes apart differences. It makes things worse as much as possible. Okay. And the same is true in Canada. Not so much with the gun violence, not yet at least. Although, when we look at the roads, it's like, well, we do just sort of go, oh, 40,000 people a year are going to die on the roads. Oh, well, geez, it's a terrible thing, isn't it? It's like, well, it doesn't have to be like that. Okay. And so I accept that, for instance, my piece has been bought not by the Great Generation so much as by global multinationals, which give me unprecedented buying power, especially as a white guy, so that I can pretty much have whatever I want, whenever I want it, probably within a day or two, depending on how it is, and so on. And so let me show you a little clip, because this is a little heavy, right? I mean, I know, it's a little heavy. So let me show you a little cartoon. Okay, here we go. Cartoons.